Hi, welcome back to the bunker. Thanks very much for dropping by. Today we're going to be looking at how I finished the river sections of the Italian boards. So I hope you enjoy this short movie showing you some of the techniques that I use for that. Please drop me a line if you have any questions, and thank you very much for subscribing. Before we begin, I wanted to have a look at some images of rivers so you can see the style of river that I'm actually trying to recreate. These are a couple of images of a Italian river, and as you can see from the colour, it's actually quite green. So this is the colour that is going to be represented on the board. Okay, this is the overview of the board as it sits now. With this movie we're going to concentrate on finishing the river. These boards can actually be switched around so the river can be in the middle. The river's quite different than my normal rivers. Normally I would carve the river straight into the board and then pour resin in them. Because this river is quite a wide and fairly deep river, it would be unpractical to pour that amount of resin just onto a plywood board, because you may end up getting twisting and misshaping. So we're going to go for more of a painted finish effect on this river, which is quite different, and I thought you might like to follow the progress of how that works. The bridge is removable, so I'm going to remove the bridge and then start finishing the river. At the moment it's just got a base coat of paint that is just splashed over from the rock work. We're actually going to cover and coat this river. The river is actually has a plywood base, so this is just the plywood that you can see coming through the sort of paint that's splashed off of the rocks. So we're going to now finish that. So the first thing we need to do is add a texture to create the idea of the water flowing down the river. To add a texture to the river, I'm going to use my resin that I normally use. This is like a resin coat. This will create the texture. What's going to be nice about this is that when it's mixed just on its own, it has a tendency to sag or slump, which means that it will create a sort of softer finish. So I'm literally just going to paint this onto the board. I've pigmented it blue so you can see what's going on, and also that it will just help the painting process on the next sort of stages. I'm just going to paint that in. I'm thinking about how the water will actually flow, which direction it's going to flow, how it's going to flow round the rocks, and things like that. It's important that you think about that. If your boards are going to be switched round, so if you've got a river that goes both ways, then clearly you're going to have some difficulty when it breaks against rocks and things. So you just have to think about how you're going to get over that before you start. It will slump and sort of settle out, which will be quite nice to create that sort of watery ripple. For this coat I'm going to add some thickener to the resin, because I want it to start being a bit more frothy, a bit more fast moving. So this will help build up some nicer sort of rougher shapes as it hits the bank and other obstacles down the river. So you can see I'm building it up along the river bank, hiding the seam between the rockwork and the water. Clearly, doing it in this way round, so the water is flowing over the rockwork and creating these nice sort of rougher areas. So I'm pleased with how that's looking. I'm going to keep adding a coat. Now this coat I've thickened right up, because this is now going to be my white water, or the start of my white water. So I've added a lot of filler into this one, and then I can then make it look quite different from the other coats, and make it spikier and sort of almost sculpt it in while it's in place. And this is quite a fast moving river. If you wanted a slower river, then you wouldn't obviously put so much white water in. Okay, now the resin is set, it's time to start adding the colour. Now at the moment there's too much contrast between the blue and the white because it's just an undertone, so we need to blend all that into almost the same colour but using subtle shades. So I've mixed up the three basic colours, a dark tone, mid-tone and a light tone. But to start off with, I'll just generally spreading the paint across the whole surface, and I'm going to mix the paints up as I go. So this is the sort of mid-tone colour, but I'm not worrying about where the lighter colours, where the washes are going to be, or you know, where the water's breaking. I literally want to get the whole tone of the river right. Okay, one of the interesting points that I sort of thought about when I mixed these colours is I wanted the colour to sort of go with the environment. Now the easiest way to do that is to actually use the same colour palette that I used for the sand in each one of my colours. This sort of cross-pollinates the sort of colours across the media and helps the whole thing look natural, as if it's all toned with the same colours. So there's a lot of sand colour within this sort of pale, well, each one of the sort of river colours that I've mixed up. What I do now is I want to darken up, and I want to give the impression that there's more rock work and things going on underneath the surface. So the only real way to do that is to start putting some darkness. So the idea is that the darkness that I'm putting in is the rock work that is obscured by the water, to give it some. I'm pretty happy with the overall tone now. It's a good idea sometimes to step back and look at it, because you'll get a better idea of how the colours are blending. So I've stepped back and I'm pretty happy. I need to now start creating depth. Now I've got the blend, so I'm going to dry this off, or help speed this up with a hot air gun. Dry this off before I start applying some washes to see if I can get some more depth out of the painted surface. Okay, that's the first coat dry. So now I'm going to put on a thin wash of my my mid-tone colour. I'm going to do that over the whole board. Okay, I've dried off the wash, the first wash that I've just put on. So now I want to bring out some of that texture. So I'm now I've mixed up a white with some of the other colours that I've got. So I'm still using the same tonal sort of colours, and now I'm just going to start dry brushing some of that texture back in. Now the tricky thing now is to dry brush it in and not show the brush strokes. So that's the tricky thing. That's why I'm using quite a big brush. I prefer to use a big brush to do these big dry brushes, and you'll see that I'm changing direction and I'm only just touching the board. Okay, I'm now going to spray in using some of my darker tone. I'm going to use the airbrush to pick out some of the sort of shadowy areas that I want to pick out. The airbrush is really good for this. It will also really subtly blend any of that rock work that I put in on the previous painting exercise, and I can just start to change that colour throughout, using quite broad strokes and using some distance, just so I can subtly change that overall. The other thing I'm doing now is I'm going round with a small brush and just picking out some details. I'm trying to get that impression that the water is flowing and that there's undercurrents and, you know, swirls of water. I've spent some time going round very carefully, painting the sort of white lines where I want them. Now I'm going to just go in with some white and literally touch off the bits that I want to be really rough. So I've finished all the painting, so I'm really happy with that, and gone round and touched up the highlights where I wanted them. Now to give the river its shine, I'm going to give the whole river a coat of resin, which will give it that gloss finish that we need to create the water effect. You can see the colour difference by adding the varnish or resin is quite a lot. It will darken and sharpen up all the colours underneath. Final little touch to the water is I want to soften up some of the areas where the spray would be from the crashing rocks. So I'm using this sort of wadding material, which I'll resin over. Okay, so I've let the resin dry overnight and come back in the morning and had a look at it, and I'm still feeling that the water is, although it's the correct colour, I've checked it against my reference, I just think it's almost too bright for the overall board. So I'm going to mix up some more resin and just try and tone that down a little bit more to suit the sort of World War II era. So I've mixed the resin with some sort of pigment, and I'm going to then flow this over the top. And what I've tried to do is not mix the pigment in too much, so I get almost like a marbling effect going on. And so this will just tone down some of that green. Okay, now the river's had a coat of resin, which I pigmented up with the sort of brown sludgy colour. I'm just adding more of this into the actual resin on the actual river itself. So this is resin pigment that I'm actually adding in to the resin, applied resin, and I'm making this sort of ripple and sort of create a sort of oily pattern as it sort of flows down the river, to give the idea that the silt has been sort of dredged up from the bottom of the river and is sort of on its way down river. And this has helped to sort of just slightly take the edge off of that green that I painted the river originally. So that's all working really nicely now. Okay, I finished the river, and this is what it looks like in its middle position. So we're just going to have a close look at what the river looks like now it's been finished. Just going to run the camera down so you can have a better view of what that looks like. I put in some extra little frothy bits and added a little jetty here with a little boat, which I think has come out really nice. And this is the bridge, the secondary bridge that goes across to the plaza. It's now in its position. Hi, thanks very much again for watching. Thanks very much also for subscribing. I hope you got some ideas to try at home yourselves. If you've got any questions, do drop me a line. Thanks very much, and I'll catch you next time.